In 2009, director David Yates gave the world a darkly beautiful chapter in the saga that enchanted the world.
In 2021, we get to try one of the most elusive bourbons of all.
The film is Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince.
The whiskey is Old Forester Birthday Bourbon.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we're looking at the 2009 film Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince.
You must obey every command I give you without question.
Yes, sir.
You do understand what I'm saying? Should I tell you to hide, you hide. Should I tell you to run, you run. Should I tell you to abandon me and save yourself, you must do so. Your word, Harry.
My word.
Now, if you've been listening since last week, you know that we go 2 by 2 with our Harry Potter movies, and so we are looking at number 5 and number 6 this season. We talked about Order of the Phoenix last week. I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. You know, and Brad, even though you came out more positively than me, I don't think it's unfair to say we were both a little let down by that movie.
Yeah, Bob, the problem is that I really love the Order of the Phoenix in book form, and it's really one of my favorites. But yeah, the movie was good, but not great. It felt like there was a lot of missed potential in that one.
Yeah, and I'm kind of glad. It sounds like I'm slowly pulling you into my opinion here, because if you listened last week, you know that I think Order of the Phoenix is actually the worst of the 8 films. I mean, we'll see, because we still have to watch number 7, which is kind of widely regarded as one of the lesser films. So maybe I'll change my tune on that. But I really just felt like, you know, David Yates didn't have his footing yet as a director. He was taking some chances in terms of how it was edited and how it was paced, and I didn't think it really paid off. And the ironic thing is that I think that this movie, The Half-Blood Prince, is perhaps the best of all of the Harry Potter movies, even better than The Prisoner of Azkaban. So I'm really excited to jump into this one. Brad, as I recall, you said that you hadn't seen this one in a long, long time. You didn't remember hardly anything about it. So you were excited to revisit this one. I don't know, what are your general first impressions of the movie?
I mean, we'll talk about this more, but I think that this particular film out of all the 8 films does the best job at interweaving the seriousness of the conflict along with the beauty of the relationship between Ron, Hermione, and Harry that is like at the core of the series. And I think a lot of the movies either dive one way or the other. They go too far into the whimsical part of the Harry Potter world or too far into the darkness. And I think that this one is hands down the best balanced movie of them all. And I'll give specific examples of that later. But for now, suffice to say, I just think that whoever wrote this script did just a masterful job of interweaving this conflict with relationship.
Yeah, so like all the Harry Potter movies, this was written by Steve Kloves, who helped to adapt it, and then J.K. Rowling also, provided some backstory and helped with the script as well. But it really does seem like this is the perfect combination of script, of director, that for the first time, Brad, I don't know how else to phrase it, but this one felt like a movie for grown-ups. And even though the material of, especially Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix got very, very dark, they ultimately felt like movies that were written for and paced in such a way that it was like a children's movie that dealt with very dark themes. And this one, I noticed almost immediately, the pacing is very different. There are a lot of long pauses. There's a lot of characters who just sit in silence for a while, to the point where, like, in the first 20 minutes of the movie, I was like, oh, is this going to be a really slow movie? And I ultimately don't think it was, but it really felt like a movie that was written for grown-ups, that had, intelligent people in mind. It made you do some digging on your own to like look in the frame and find information. And it was really the first one for me that seemed to turn that corner from all right, these are kids' movies that have mature themes to this is a mature movie. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. And I think it reflects the continuing maturity of the series as a whole. I think if there's anything that Rowling did well with the books, which there are a ton of things, but I think one of the best things that she did was step by step deepen the level of maturity needed to read the books. Like the first 3 books, I would say like 7, 8, 9-year-olds can read. But by the time you hit 4 and 5, you're starting to hit stuff that probably shouldn't read until you're a teenager. And then by the time you hit 6 and 7, like they can be pretty dark books that require a depth of emotional maturity to read. At the very least, I think that they help children develop emotional maturity, which I think is huge.
Yeah, Brad, and I think you used the perfect word, which is balance. This movie really does balance the emotional maturity required as a viewer to engage with this with, I actually really loved that it had some callbacks to the earlier movies. I love that there is a Quidditch sequence in this movie because,
yes,
it just seemed like for a while, like these movies are getting so dark and they're so focused on the non-Hogwarts stuff that you kind of forget that we are dealing with teenagers who are still going to school and dealing with hormones. And that was something we really appreciated about Goblet of Fire, and Order of the Phoenix just dropped all those storylines altogether, mostly because they had to cram so much information into that short runtime. This one, I really love that they made space, that they made time to kind of let the characters breathe a little bit, to flesh out the characters, and to give you as an audience that reminder that, yes, we're dealing with like cosmic level wars of good and evil, but also involving teenagers.
Yeah, I mean, the way that they have Harry and Ron like standing over this crowd of like first and second years at the start of the film, and then McGonagall just calls them over to do something as simple as saying, hey, like, you need to sign up for a potions class because you want to be an Auror. And all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, like Harry has like vocational aspirations in life other than defeating the great dark Lord of Evil.
It's so funny you brought up that little like 30-second scene because as it was happening, I wrote down, it is so refreshing to see Professor McGonagall again and not just as like set decoration. And from what I've read in terms of backstory, Maggie Smith was actually receiving radiation therapy for cancer during the shooting of this movie. And so, her role is kind of limited still. But I love that they just wrote a scene for her to be kind of wisecracking, to give a little wink, and then to kind of scurry off into the rest of the movie. And it just felt like, oh yeah, this is the world of Harry Potter that I'm familiar with. And it almost kind of reset Order of the Phoenix in a way. And again, I don't want to throw Order of the Phoenix under the bus too much, but this one felt like a return to the familiar and kind of reining in the things that went wrong with number 4 and with number 5.
Bob, I feel like it's going to be hard to rein in our evaluation of this movie because we both like it so much. But I think it's about time we head on over to what I like to call Brad Explains.
What a coincidence. I also like to call it Brad Explains. This is America's favorite segment where Brad breaks down the plot of the movie that he has just seen, often for the first time. This is not Brad's first time seeing this movie, but it is your first time seeing it in quite a while. So, Brad, you have 60 seconds on the clock to explain to our listeners the general outline of the movie Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince.
Yeah, so in our 6th installment of this series, you see Harry, Ron, and Hermione returning to Hogwarts. Draco Malfoy has been tasked to do some dark deed, and Snape has agreed to help him with it. Harry finds himself in possession of this book that is, it's a textbook, but there are tons of notes in it by this half-blood prince, and he uses it to become amazing at potions. And then throughout the movie, there's this mystery of people being cursed, of people being poisoned, that something dark is going on at Hogwarts, and Harry slowly unravels the mystery. He assumes rightly all the way that Draco is up to something, and by the end of it, you find out that Draco has smuggled a group of Death Eaters into Hogwarts, and they, spoiler alert, kill Albus Dumbledore. The other thing going on is that Albus and Harry find out that
5 seconds.
Voldemort has separated his soul into Horcruxes, and they go on a journey to find one of them. Boom.
All right. There it is, 60 seconds. Brad, I don't know where we want to steer this conversation because I want to talk about the filmmaking aspects. I want to talk about the performances, but I mean, let's maybe just take just a second here again to praise the story of this movie. I was reading some reviews from like hardcore Harry Potter people, and one of the reviews that I read said that in terms of filmmaking craft, this might be the best of all the Harry Potter movies, but in terms of adapting what was on the page, they think this is one of the worst. I can't speak to that because, as I mentioned last week, I got so fed up with the Harry Potter book series after Order of the Phoenix that I just lost my desire to finish the series. I never read the 6th or the 7th book. And
what?
I know. I've never
Bob.
Brad, I've never had the desire to go back and finish it either. Like maybe someday, but I love the movies so much that it's almost like, all right, these are good enough for me to understand what happens. But I will say this, like, not having that baggage from the book and whatever may or may not be true about adapting it, what really stuck out to me this time was Harry Potter works best when there is an element of a mystery that needs to be solved. Because in a lot of ways, like the bones of this plot really remind me of Chamber of Secrets. You know, there's people that certain things are happening to, and like in Chamber of Secrets, when they see the basilisk and people get like, you know, frozen or whatever, people are trying to figure out.
Petrified, Robert.
Thank you, petrified. They're trying to figure out like what's going on, and by the end, you have this reveal that, you know, the Horcrux that was Tom Riddle's diary is trying to manifest him back into existence and blah, blah, blah. It has elements of Goblet of Fire where there are like these tasks that Harry is going on and he has to find these artifacts and these objects that help him, you know, give him clues to the next task that's coming. And I love it when Rowling introduces these little plot points that keep you interested, that keep you engaged as a viewer in that you're also trying to solve a mystery along with Harry. And I think, again, that's kind of where, for me at least, Order of the Phoenix suffers because there's not really that much of an element of a mystery there. Like you have this idea of something happening and, you know, maybe there's a prophecy, but in the movie at least, it doesn't have that sort of intrigue to it. And this one really returns to form in terms of trying to bring the audience along on this quest to solve a puzzle.
Well, and I think that the reason you are intrigued by the mystery and the reason it works so well is because it's interwoven with so many scenes of just Harry, Ron, and Hermione being best friends. Mm-hmm. Like, there's so many little moments, like when Hermione has a little bit of, like, foam from the butterbeer on her mouth, or when her and Ron are fighting and Harry and Hermione have like a tender, you know, friend moment where she's charmed these birds and they chase Ron and like puff into the door. Like, you have so many moments like that in this film that are so important. But the beauty of the filmmaking in this is the fact that David Yates is able to take those moments and place within them the important plot points of the movie seamlessly. And like one scene that I'm specifically thinking of is there's a cut. It's kind of a hard cut from whatever was happening previously. And you see Ron sitting on Harry's bed, right? And he has eaten all these chocolates and Harry comes in and they have a little bit of a who's on first moment. And, you know, Ron is in love with Romilda Vane. And Harry, you know, recalling back to his conversation with Hermione, realizes like, oh, Romilda must have put this love potion in these chocolates and, you know, tried to get me to fall in love with her. And so he takes Ron to Professor Slughorn, who he got into a fight with earlier. And in the middle of like preparing this, you know, antidote to this love potion, he just kind of casually is like, hey, I'm really sorry about, you know, our conversation from earlier. I didn't mean to offend you. And yeah, in the middle of that, he uses the word Voldemort, and Slughorn all of a sudden with utter seriousness is like, do not use that name. And then they move back into the lightness of like talking with Ron, hanging out with him. And then at the end of that, they're going to celebrate, you know, hey, like, let's just have a little pick-me-up after, you know, this ordeal. And Ron gets poisoned. And like the scene doesn't end there. They save Ron, they take him to the hospital wing, and in the middle of like learning more about the poisoning and this dark mystery plot, you have whatever actress plays Lavender Brown come in and give the most earnest performance of her life, calling him Wan Wan. And so it's just this complete intermixing of like all the seriousness of the plot with all of the silliness of being a teenager. And that's just one scene. And he does that probably 4 or 5 times throughout this movie. And I just was blown away with how beautifully directed this movie was.
Well, it's directed well, it's paced well, it's scripted well, and one of the things that stood out to me, even just going back to that scene that you're talking about, is the way that they build in releases of tension. Like they build in like scheduled laughs into the movie. And it works really well because in some of the other movies, the humor, it can just be really awkward. Like they try it at different points where it shouldn't really be. And I feel like in this movie, they do a really good job of that. And I know that your boy Michael Gambon is probably going to receive some sort of terrible award from you later on. But I have to say, Brad, like even in that scene there, the punchline of that scene is like this awkward beat. And then Michael Gambon goes, to be young and feel love's cold sting. Like, and it's just a really funny line, but also very earnest and very heartwarming. Like, yeah, they know what's going on here too. But it's really nice that it's not just this weird mashup of darkness and teen hormones. There seems to be like a heart behind it as well. And you get that in the form of that line from Dumbledore. So yeah, I think in many ways, this is just a significant step up from what we saw in Order of the Phoenix. Brad, I do want to talk about the filmmaking here, though. So we're dealing with the same director, David Yates, who will finish out the series in the next two movies. I do think this is the high point of David Yates as director of these movies. But I also want to say that there is something to be said about the cinematographer here, Bruno Delbonnel. And he is one of the more famous cinematographers working today. Like, he's not on the level of Roger Deakins or Emmanuel Lubezki, but he's been nominated for 5 Oscars now. He was nominated for an Oscar for this movie, which is a huge achievement because the Oscars just did not like to reward the Harry Potter movies for some reason. But there is something that I want to mention about him. The director Quentin Tarantino just did an interview recently where he was talking about some obscure director that he liked from the 1970s and how when this director started off, he really didn't have a good visual sense, and then he paired up with a cinematographer. And it was very much like the Orson Welles and Greg Toland thing, where the director was like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing with the camera. You can set up all the shots. You can make everything look great for me. I'll direct the actors. I'm good with actors. And they formed such a great partnership because it brought a visual flair to that partnership. And I feel like David Yates in the first movie, the whole movie just seems very unfocused and like there's not really much of an aesthetic there except dark. It's just like, hey, what if we made everything dark? This one, like you can tell that there was a lot of thought put into each camera setup and the way the camera moves. And it's not just like splicing things together with a bunch of different angles of the same scene, but it's very deliberate camera movement. And I think that this partnership between Delbonnel and Yates really allowed Yates to like work with the actors better this time around and allowed Delbonnel to take over the visual aspect of the movie. And I think that it's like a match made in heaven.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I love most about this movie is that there are multiple shots that could be paintings. Like right after when Harry has taken the Felix Felicis potion and him and Slughorn and Hagrid are mourning the death of Aragog, they give you a shot with the castle off to the left. You see the three of them as small figures like in the foreground. And then there's just this beautiful shot of all these mountains and a meadow. And it literally, like I paused it for a second. And I think two things contributed to this. A, the quality of my TV is not great. But B, the shot just looked like it could be a painting. I literally paused it and looked at it and was like, man, this literally almost could be like an impressionist painting of Hogwarts and the death of Aragog. Like, it's stunning. And so it really reminded me of a few of the shots from Cuaron just making Hogwarts beautiful.
Well, maybe this is a good time for us to segue into the acting performances in this movie because for the most part, and I think with maybe one glaring exception, I think everyone's really good, top to bottom. And I guess I'll start with the most controversial one, Brad. I want your take on Michael Gambon in this movie because this is kind of Dumbledore's big moment in the Harry Potter franchise. Like, this is his shining hour. If you're an actor, like you kill for this part at this point. And we all know Michael Gambon did not seem to really care that much about making Dumbledore similar to the books. I will say, regardless of what you think of his performance across the multiple movies that he's in, I think this is the best performance he gives as Dumbledore. I think he brings a layer of vulnerability to Dumbledore that you don't see in any of the other movies. Like, you definitely see that he is very caring and has a heart and looks out for these kids. But that scene where they're going hunting for this Horcrux and Harry has to pour the potion down Dumbledore's throat and he's just like begging Harry not to do it. And you see Dumbledore reduced to this very kind of human, limited person. It's heartbreaking. And that scene is played so well. I just want your take on Michael Gambon, because I know you don't like him, but what do you think of this performance as compared to his other ones?
I think that the scene that you talked about is really well played. I think that for the most part, once he starts drinking the potion, you see some emotion come out of him that you don't really see anywhere else in any of the films, unless he's yelling about putting your name in the fire. And so I do kind of like him in that area. But Bob, I am not going to lie to you. I think Michael Gambon in the other movies was like overacting in a lot of different ways. It's this movie where I just realized I just think he's a bad actor.
Oh, that's not... Okay, well, let me ask you this, because I think I know the answer. Have you ever watched him in anything that's not a Harry Potter movie?
No.
Okay. He's not a bad actor, Brad.
What has he been in outside of this?
I mean, he's probably been in like 80 movies, Brad. Like, you should look up his IMDb. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus for not seeing him in anything else. I'm just saying the man is a good actor.
Here's the thing, Bob. Watch this movie again and tell me if he ever speaks with a different tone of voice other than the one scene when he's drinking the potion.
Okay, so
he literally never changes his cadence, his tone of voice. Like, whether he's cracking the joke that I agree, like the line of the joke at the hospital is a great line. But the way he delivers it is no different than the way he delivers his speech at the start of the movie.
Yeah, okay,
which is no different than the way he talks to Harry at any point. Like, the beauty of Dumbledore and Harry is that there's an actual true relationship there where Dumbledore really cares for Harry, and you don't get a single inch of that between Gambon and Harry. He doesn't ever look at him with any sense of fondness. His facial expression never changes. Like, he is so bad in this movie at showing that he cares about anything. He just feels aloof and above everything at every moment of the movie. The only time you ever feel like he might care is after he dies and McGonagall says, well, he was very fond of you, Harry. And the way that McGonagall looks at Harry, you're like, oh, she's really fond of him too. But I'm not sure if Michael Gambon was.
I hear what you're saying. I will let the point stand. I just think that there's a difference between saying the choices that he makes in this performance to underplay it is different than saying he is a bad actor. Because I think that there is someone in this movie who is an actual bad actor. And we might as well go there now and get the gripes out of the way. I think that Bonnie Wright as Ginny Weasley is a legitimately not good actress. And you know, you always kind of take that risk when you hire child actors for a movie. And I appreciate that for the most part, the Harry Potter franchise did not recast actors as they went on. Like, most of them finish out their roles from, you know, film 1 to film 8 if they make it that long. But as J.K. Rowling decided to kind of force the issue of Harry is going to end up with Ginny, you get this really awkward kind of, okay, I guess that Daniel Radcliffe and Bonnie Wright now have to develop chemistry. And it's not just that they have no chemistry as actors. It's that I think that her awkwardness on camera, like her discomfort with being on camera, her inability to show any range of emotions, her inability to deliver lines of dialogue in an intelligible way that doesn't require me to put subtitles on, it actually brings out the worst in the actors around her. And like, if you watch the scene where Harry and Ginny go exploring in the room with the cabinet or whatever, and they kiss each other for the first time, that might be Daniel Radcliffe's worst scene in the whole movie too. And you can almost feel him trying to pull the weight of the scene because she's not good. And it ultimately brings out the worst tendencies in his acting abilities as well. Brad, I just like, I hate to say it because, again, like, you know, I think she was under 18 at this time, so we're talking about a kid, but she's just not a good actress.
Bob, she is horrifically bad in this movie. Like, Like her performance is so overwhelmingly bad when she sits down and like just looks at Harry intently with like this weird stare on her face and then goes, "Open up." And you're like, "What? Why are you telling him to open up?" And then she like force feeds him half of this like little treacle. And then like Ron comes over and plops down and like actually moves his face as he looks at them. And you're like, oh, he's acting.
By the way, maybe the best Rupert Grint performance, because I think he's a pretty limited actor, if we're being honest. But like his ability to play the goofiness and to play the nervousness, like he knocks it out of the park in this movie. And then you sit him next to Bonnie Wright and you're like, oof.
Yeah.
If it's that noticeable between these two actors, thank God we don't see her interacting with, Maggie Smith very much.
Yeah, dude, she is really, really bad. Can I bring us over to my boy Danny R though?
You mean Daniel Radcliffe?
Yeah, my boy.
It took me a minute to piece that. I'm like, Danny R. Who? That's not a character in the movie. Yeah, let's talk Daniel Radcliffe for a minute.
Bob, I think that there are two horrific performances in this movie by Michael Gambon and Bonnie Wright. I don't think Daniel Radcliffe is much better in this movie.
Yeah.
And I will say, I don't know if this is a pass or not, or honestly, maybe it should be a detraction, but like my boy was like heavy on drugs at this point, and it looks like he had Botox injected into his face because I don't think his face, like there was zero facial expression the entire movie from him.
Yeah.
And like, I think that he still like turned in a pretty decent performance, but it was rough to watch, especially when you had Bonnie Wright, who is just a bad actress, next to him, who felt lifeless. Like the moments where the two of them were together, it just compounded the struggles that Daniel Radcliffe was having to have her next to him.
Well, and that's
but I don't know. How did you feel about Harry in this movie?
Well, that's the thing, is all of the main actors, like, so, Rupert Grint, Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, are all limited actors, I would call them. And that's not to say anything like, really mean against them. It's just like, Daniel Radcliffe is not Daniel Day-Lewis and Emma Watson is not a Meryl Streep. Like, it's, that's okay. You can still be a successful actor and have a smaller range of abilities. But I think that from movie to movie, it really does seem like with Radcliffe and Watson in particular, like you'll have a good movie, you'll have a bad movie. You'll have a good movie, you'll have a bad movie. And there's just no consistency. And I think that's one of the more interesting things because from film 5 to film 8, they're working with the same director. And so it's kind of like, why is there still so much variation in the quality of their performances? Because I also think this is a pretty bad Emma Watson performance. I think it's one of the better Hermione movies. Like, her character has a ton to do.
Say it with me, Bob. Hermione.
That's what I said.
You said Hermione.
I didn't say, I said Hermione.
You just said it again. Hermione.
It's not Hermione.
Yeah, there's no O.
How many? I'm going to Google it right now.
Google it, man.
How many? There is an O.
Yeah, there is an O, but you don't pronounce it. It's just Hermione.
How many syllables in Hermione? 4 syllables. Hermione.
It's not Hermione.
This is the first thing it said. Okay. Film and Whiskey Nation. Hermione or Hermione?
Yeah, dude, listen to the movies. That's what they call her.
They
Hermione.
just talk fast, bro. Hermione.
It's
all right, whatever. I think you're exaggerating how much I'm emphasizing the O. I'm not saying her. I'm not making her Irish. Hermione.
I'm just making an observation, Bob.
All right, listen. Let me make my point, man. Emma Watson as Hermione. Hermione. I think this is one of the better Hermione movies, but I think that Emma Watson's performance is a little bit wanting, if that makes sense. Like, she's required to cry a lot in this movie. And she's a really bad crier. You can just tell she's just like making a face and you're supposed to believe that she's crying, but she's real bad at it. And it's kind of the same thing with Daniel Radcliffe. Anytime he has to cry, it's very unconvincing. And so, yeah, I'm with you, man. Radcliffe and Watson, I feel like there are scenes where it's like, yeah, they're fine. Like, they're really growing as actors. And then the next scene, it's like, but there's still the glaring limitations of their abilities.
See, I disagree with you a little bit. I don't think this is like Watson's best performance, but I actually think that this is a pretty good one. I think that she is able to handle like what Ron is going through, what Harry's going through. Like the moment between her and Radcliffe that is probably one of my favorite lines from the entire series, when she's in the library and she points out Romilda Vane and she's like, well, she's in love with you. And Harry's like, well, what's wrong with that? She goes, well, she thinks you're the chosen one. And he goes, well, I am the chosen one. And she just gives this look of disgust and like whacks him on the face with the paper that she's holding.
See that girl over there? That's Romilda Vane. Apparently she's trying to smuggle you a love potion.
Really?
Hey, she's only interested in you because she thinks you're the chosen one.
But I am the chosen one. Okay, sorry.
Like, it's moments like that I think that Watson really shines throughout this movie. And for me, I actually really enjoyed her performance overall.
I will say that the farther on these movies go, I just continue to be impressed with the actor that plays Draco Malfoy. Like, I think that he low-key might be the best actor of the child actors. And for so many movies, he was just, what are you going to do, Potter? And like, that was that's all he was asked to do. And then I think in like the third, fourth, fifth movie, he was just asked to be the sniveling coward. But when you see what they do with the character of Draco in the 6th, 7th, and 8th movies, he's incredibly conflicted. He knows what he's doing is wrong. He's afraid of kind of pledging his fealty or whatever to Voldemort. And you 100% buy it. Like, it's a performance that shows at his heart, he's still a kid. He's still scared. He still needs someone to care for him. And I really, really, really love his performance in this movie.
Well, and even the way that the director uses him when, like, there's this broad sweeping shot of the castle and you see Lavender Brown and Ron running off to make out. And then you just see Draco standing on his own at a balcony. And you just, like, even from a long distance away, you see the weight on his shoulders. I just think that the director used Tom Felton in, like, just amazing ways in this movie. And you still get a little bit of that bravado that, you know, he's trying to show. But overall, you kind of see the depth of him. And I'm with you, Bob. I think he gives a phenomenal performance in this movie.
All right, a couple more people before we go to break. I want to talk about Jim Broadbent, who is doing his debut in the Harry Potter universe here as Horace Slughorn. The thing I love about watching these established British actors, and Jim Broadbent is an absolute legend of British theater and cinema. Coming into this movie, like, it's always funny to watch them kind of get their sea legs because they either think that this material is beneath them or that it is a parody, a self-parody, and so they play it really hammy, or some of them take it really seriously. And I think that from the beginning of this movie to the end, Jim Broadbent kind of covers all of those. At the beginning, when he's still trying to get Slughorn's tics down, like, he's playing it really hammy, and he's kind of like, he looks like he could have played like one of the hobbits in Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy, where it's just like, oh, that one burps. You know what I mean? Like, that's his whole character.
We don't talk about the Hobbit trilogy on this podcast.
Well, that just for the sake of comparison. But by the end of the movie, where you really get into what Slughorn is hiding and what he's repressing, that's why you bring Jim Broadbent into the movie, because he plays it so freaking well as a man who is apprehensive and hesitant to share his memories. I really loved it.
Dude, I was just blown away by Broadbent in this movie. Like, from the moment when he comes on screen and, like, Dumbledore pokes him and he goes, Merlin's beard, to the end when he is, like, almost like sobbing as he brings, you know, this memory, this repressed memory out of his mind. I just love his performance. And I will say, I feel like he's a weird mixture of like Bill Murray and Mr. Bean. He just, the way he moves his face sometimes, he looks like Mr. Bean, but the way he talks sometimes, the way he looks like Bill Murray. I just love him in this movie. And I think he adds so much. And honestly, like, in the moments when Daniel Radcliffe is struggling, I think that Jim Broadbent and Robbie Coltrane really lift Radcliffe in the scene where the three of them are with Aragog. It just pays to have good actors, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
And yet, like I said before, I think that there are some people who just think I need to be as hammy as possible. You know, for every good Ralph Fiennes performance in this series, like I thought in Order of the Phoenix, he was so over the top, and it just kind of like makes you roll your eyes a little bit. And then from movie 5 to movie 8, I think that Helena Bonham Carter as Bellatrix is like comes on the screen and is just like, I am going to chew all the scenery. I am going to be over the top in everything she does. And honestly, she pulls me out of the movie a little bit, if I'm being honest. And I know that's kind of the character, but she's so hammy and so over the top that I'm not a fan of her performance as Bellatrix.
Yeah, I mean, this wasn't popular at the time, but she almost has a bit of like an early Harley Quinn feel to her, right? She's like blowing up the house and she's just like jumping up and down like, ah, ha, ha, ha. Yeah, and I think the other problem is that of all these British actors and actresses, Helena Bonham Carter is one of the few that is like, I would say, pretty daggone recognizable in the American public. So like, for me, the reason she takes me out is because I'm like, oh yeah, there's Helena Bonham Carter. She's in Sweeney Todd and she's in, you know, all these other movies that I've seen. Like, what is she doing with all these British people? But as far as her performance goes, I actually think that she represents what Rowling wrote in the books perfectly. So I really love her performance, but just the fact that she's in it makes me go, oh, Helena Bonham Carter. Got it.
All right, we're running super long because of our debate about the pronunciation of Hermione. I do want to say...
that is not the only reason.
That's the reason. Bob. I do want to say both flashback Tom Riddles were excellent. Like the creepy kid version and then like the manipulative teenager version, especially the manipulative teenager version. Those kids make you realize how bad some of the main kid actors are.
Yeah, he is like horror film creepy in those scenes.
Well, it's
like,
two different kids. It's two different kids.
No, I know. Yeah. But like both of them, the way that they are played, it's horror film level of like skin crawlingly terrifying the way that they play those scenes. And it's phenomenal.
All right, Brad, it's time for us to break and try our Old Forester Birthday Bourbon. What do you say?
Let's get to it, Bob.
So today we are drinking Old Forester Birthday Bourbon. This is the 2020 release of Old Forester's Birthday Bourbon. This was something that Old Forester launched 20 years ago now. This is actually the 20th release of this line. It has become, for lack of a better term, kind of the BTAC of Old Forester releases. It is their most sought-after release every year. It's their most allocated. The smallest number of barrels are chosen to become birthday bourbon, so it's a really small blend. I think they retail for what? Like, let's see. Retail price on these, Brad, is $129.99. They sell out instantaneously. People will camp out overnight outside of liquor stores to try to get their hands on a bottle of this. In the state of Ohio, it becomes a lottery pick. A lot of states do it like that. If you go online right now and you try to find a bottle of Old Forester Birthday 2020, what you'll find is that the absolute cheapest you can get it is $499, and about the average price that I'm seeing is $999. So what we're drinking today, Brad, in one sense, is $1,000 bourbon. And before we get any further, I want to say that here's how we obtained a sample. Now, Brad and I have very good relationships with a lot of distillers, and they will send us samples to review. Obviously, that's not happening with Birthday Bourbon. As good of a relationship as we have with Old Forester, one of my best friends, Cy Hudson, shout out to Cy. He won a lottery in Kentucky, got to buy this bottle at retail, which I think for him was actually only $99.99. And he was gracious enough to give us a sample of this. Now, we're talking one of the most sought-after bourbons in the world that is now retailing for $1,000. So if it takes a friend winning the lottery just for us to be able to try it, Brad, I think that gives our listeners some indication of how hard it is to get your hands on this stuff.
Yeah, I just want to say once again, huge shout out to Cy. He is just the freaking man. He's a stellar individual and deserves all the accolades that come with giving us this whiskey. So congrats to you, Mr. Hudson.
Now, I will say, because we have such a good relationship with Old Forester, like, we're not treating them the way that we treat Buffalo Trace when we talk about this kind of stuff. Like, this product, it makes sense why it's allocated. They only, I think this year's batch was 90 barrels that they made, a blend into. But they have a really rigorous selection process for, like, what can be birthday bourbon. So it's always going to be allocated. And the distiller cannot help what secondary prices become. Like, this is not their doing. They set it at a really reasonable rate, which, to Buffalo Trace's credit, they set it at a really reasonable rate. It's just that the market for bourbon right now is so insane that you've got these people marking it up 10 times to flip a bottle and make a profit. And I think that's what you and I really rail against here, Brad. But with all that said, what we're drinking today, Brad, is a 98 proof bourbon made from 72% corn, 18% rye, 10% malted barley. 2020 birthday bourbon is aged for at least 10 years. So we're drinking a well-aged bourbon, albeit under 100 proof. Brad, what are you picking up on the nose here?
I think that this aroma is really pleasant. There's some nice orange and vanilla notes that give it this kind of creamsicle aroma. For me, I'm getting a little bit of a hint of like peanuts and toffee as well. It's not the best nose that I've ever had, but I would say this is a really pleasant and enticing nose that I'm going to give it an 8.5 to.
Wow, we are coming out of the gate in wildly different places. I don't know if I shared a single note with you on the nose of this, Brad. I had to let this sit for like 7 minutes before I could really give it a nose because it was so harsh and so astringent in my glass. This was insanely alcohol forward. Like I tried to do the nosing technique where you open your mouth a little bit too, and it actually like burned my nostrils like Ron Burgundy smelling Sex Panther by Odeon. The notes that I eventually got were apples and cinnamon. Like it was very strongly red delicious apple, very strongly cinnamon, and then a dark cherry, almost like when you eat like a black cherry ice cream kind of a thing. There was a little bit of creaminess to it, but it took forever to get those notes, and it was insanely harsh on the nose. I'm only going to give this, Brad, a 5.5 on the nose.
I don't know if you were actually drinking the birthday bourbon here. That is amazing to me.
I was going to say, I might ask you the same question because I'm the one that got the sample, divvied it up, and gave it to you. So
yeah, I drank what you gave me.
There you go.
And for me, when I get onto the taste, I feel like there's a lot of heavy oak notes that are present throughout. There's some nice hints of caramel, vanilla, a little bit of spiciness there, like a baking spice. I think it's a decently complex taste. That doesn't have as much of the nose as I would hope, but it's still a solid overall palate that I'm going to give an 8 out of 10 to.
Yeah, I'm in a vastly different place. This is really thin, really hot, extra oaky, nothing special at all going on here, Brad. Like there actually wasn't a lot of sweetness to this. It was just alcohol and oak for me. It lacked complexity. There was no vanilla on this at all for me. Towards the back end, when you go to swallow, and this will kind of taper into my finish as well, there's a lot of dark cherry, like a lot of dark, bitter cherry. It's almost like drinking like an Amaro or something. It was really interesting, but it's really bitter, really oaky, and there is like nothing else to this palate. I gave it a 6 out of 10, and that'll take me to finish, where I'm also going to only give this a 6 out of 10. The note that I took was just bitter, dark cherry. I think that the chest burn on the way down is nice. It warms you really well, but that's only because it's 98 proof. This just did not have much going on the palate for me. And I will say this, like up front, I talked with Jackie about this last time she was on the show as well. Old Forester's expressions really run the gamut from, your like $20 bottle of Olfo all the way up to birthday bourbon. And some of their flavor profile I love. I love the 1920. I absolutely loved that single barrel rye that we just tried. Old Forester 150, which we hope to get to in a few weeks here, is one of the best bourbons I've ever had in my life. But then it's like, regular Olfo, I'm not a huge fan of. And I think this reminds me so much of your regular Old Forester that it's just kind of disappointing to me because it's just, I'm not really tasting a huge difference between like an Old Forester 100 and this.
Man, that's crazy. Maybe I need to give regular Old Forester a try then, because I'm enjoying this quite a bit.
It costs 50 times less, I can tell you that much.
That's true. Yeah. So for me, like the finish, I got like lingering flavors of caramel that are hanging out with the oak and the rye spices. And then like as it just sat on my throat for a while, I felt like I got like this final little like last gasp of vanilla that I was really impressed by. I'll give it an 8 out of 10 on the finish as well. And as far as balance go, like I think this is a solidly balanced whiskey. There's no area that like blows my mind. But overall, it's really solid. I'll give it a 7.5 on balance.
I'm going to give it a 6.5 on balance. I think that it's pretty consistent from start to finish. It's just lacking a depth. And Brad, this may be kind of getting spoiled for us by that single barrel rye we had a couple weeks ago, and especially by that Blanton straight from the barrel that we had last week. But when you're getting up into this kind of echelon or tier of highly allocated, highly sought after, I mean, we've tried at least one BTAC now. You and I together have tried Pappy 15. I've tried the Old Forester 150. We've had this Blanton straight from the barrel. I would say that all of those are just like markedly better than this. And just there's a level of depth and complexity that this just doesn't have for me. So yeah, I'll give it a 6.5, but this drinks like a $30 whiskey, way more than it drinks like even a $130 whiskey, let alone a $1,000 whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, I will say there's no way that this bourbon is worth even $130. If I can jump into my value score, I think that $130 is a hefty price tag. And, this bourbon impressed me, but not at a level that deserves triple digits. So I'll give it a 4 out of 10 on value. I will say I can't believe that this is being marked up, to quadruple digits. That's pure insanity to me.
Yeah, I mean, if you won the lottery, Brad, the bottle lottery, and you had the option to buy this for, let's even call it $100, right? Like, let's say that, I'm sure in some states it is $100. I'm pretty sure that's what Cy told me he paid for this. What would you give it out of 10? Like, if you had the option to buy this at 100 or pass on it, what are you gonna do?
I mean, the 130 at the 130 price point, I gave it a 4 out of 10. If it was 100, I might give it a 4.5, maybe a 5. Once again, they kind of have you over a barrel because even if you know that you're not going to like love it, it's like, well, I'm going to buy it for $100 so that I can give it to my friends.
Yeah, or trade it for something you want more.
Exactly, or trade it for something better. So, yeah, I would pay it, but only because of the resale value.
I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10 on value. Brad, this was just a significant bummer for me. And that's not to say that like every release of Birthday Bourbon isn't better than this, but you'll hear me rave about something when we get around to this Old Forester 150. You heard me rave about the Old Forester single barrel rye. I just think that this particular release is just not doing it for me. I'm coming out to a 27 out of 50. Brad, what are you coming out to?
I'm at a 36 out of 50, Bob. 9 points higher.
All right, that brings us out to a 63 out of 100 or a 31.5 out of 50. Brad, do you recommend?
Yeah, I would recommend. If you're able to get your hands on it and, not at an astronomically crazy price, like, yeah, go for it. It's good stuff.
I mean, I don't think I'm going to dissuade anybody. Like, if you go to a bar that has a bottle of this on the shelf, you're probably going to want to try it. I don't think it's worth paying the money for, to be honest with you. So I'm not going to recommend, but let's be honest here. If you see it, you're probably going to try it anyway. So that's where we're coming out on Old Forester Birthday Bourbon 2020. Once again, we want to say a huge thank you to our friend Cy Hudson for this sample. I cannot thank that man enough.
But Bob, I think it's about time we get back into talking about Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince.
Let's get to it, Brad. right, that was Old Forester Birthday Bourbon 2020. We're getting back into talking about a movie that it seems like we both really love, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. I'm not going to ruin this movie with my Bob Ruins It segment, but I do have I had a few nitpicks with this movie, most of which were cleared up for me by just Googling Harry Potter Wikipedia pages. I will say, I really do hate when something is kind of a plot hole, but then they kind of patch over it by saying yeah, well, it's magic, so whatever. It's okay, it's still a plot inconsistency.
How does magic work? How I say it works.
Exactly. The way that they, in the movie, not in the book, the way that they introduce the Felix Felicis potion, that's it'll give you perfect, I don't know how Jim Broadbent says it, but he's it'll make all your endeavors successful. I'm oh, cool, just drink that and then go murder Voldemort. That seems like that would be a really easy way to take care of that. And then, you Google it. They're well, it doesn't really make you successful. It just, increases the likelihood of things that were already going to happen. But I'm still all right, well, I would still feel much more comfortable about battling Voldemort if I had a vial full of Felix Felicis to just chug. I mean, am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong at all. I literally have that thought every single time. And part of me is well, you have a 16-year-old kid and he's been told by his mentor, his father figure, hey, this is the single most important thing to understanding how we can defeat Voldemort. And so in his mind, he goes, all right, well, I'm going to use Felix Felicis for that then, because my guy is saying this is the most important thing. So that's the way that I justify it in my brain. But I don't disagree with you in any way.
I mean, I'm just saying, now that Harry has
the same thing.
Now that Harry has the recipe, just go make a couple more vials for yourself, my man.
Yeah, well, so I'll nitpick that. He doesn't have the recipe. He just has the little bottle.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that would be my only thing. But yeah, no, I agree with you. The problem that I have with your take, though, is simply the fact that in the book and in the movies, I think that when he takes the Felix Felicis potion, it is hands down one of my favorite scenes in all 8 movies or all 7 books. When the pincers thing, when he tells Ron and Hermione, I don't know, it just seems like the place to be, And they're looking at him, they're like, no, it doesn't seem like the place to be. Everything about Felix Felicis makes me happy. So even if it is logically just illogical to take it now and not when he's going to fight Voldemort, I love it.
Yeah,
so.
No, I totally agree. My other nitpick is this. Okay, so they finally get Slughorn's memories. And I do want to say, just a quick aside, the special effects when they go into people's memories and it has that ink blotting effect that then becomes the next scene, one of the coolest special effects in all the Harry Potter franchises. We complained about the special effects in Order of the Phoenix. This movie has significantly better effects. But after they see Slughorn's memory and they hear Tom Riddle say the word Horcrux, and then Dumbledore comes out of that memory and he goes my God, I had no idea. I can't believe Horcruxes. And then in the very next scene, he's so yeah, I've known about this Horcrux thing for a while, and I've actually already found some of them, and I think I know where another one is. And I'm okay, so do you know about Horcruxes or don't you? Because in the last scene, you just said what a shock, what a surprise. I could have never seen this coming. Things are much worse than I feared. Is it just the fact that he reveals that there's 7 of them? I don't know what's going on there, because it seems super inconsistent.
Yeah, I think that the actual surprise is the fact that he has split his soul 7 times.
Okay.
But I agree with you 100%. The way he delivers the line implies that he doesn't even know that, that Tom Riddle ever knew about Horcruxes until this moment. And then, like you said, 2 seconds later, it's and I've been chasing down them ever since I saw that diary. I've wondered about this. I'm okay, well, you already knew about the Horcruxes, bro. You just didn't realize there was 7. But I will say, this is one little small thing I noticed and liked that they did, is that when Tom Riddle was asking Slughorn about the Horcruxes, right at the end when when Slughorn is like, how can you even imagine committing murder once, Tom? He fiddles with the ring on his hand, which is his father's ring, which he had gotten by killing his father, meaning that he had already created a Horcrux at the time he was talking to Slughorn.
All right, so here's a question.
Which is just super cool, even though that didn't happen in the books. I think in the books, he went to kill his father after he left Hogwarts, but I still like that.
So that's definitely an Easter egg, because I had no idea that was a thing. But do you have to, like, intentionally create a Horcrux? I guess you can't, because Harry is one of the Horcruxes, and he didn't intend for that to happen. So then did he actually split his soul 8 times? I'm confused.
So the way that the Horcrux magic works, as far as I know, is that you have to know that you're going to do it before you kill. And so the reason Harry became a Horcrux is essentially because Voldemort was preparing to make a Horcrux, his final Horcrux, by killing Harry. So, like, Harry's death was supposed to be the final Horcrux, but his mom threw herself in the way, so Voldemort's magic of creating the Horcrux was done beforehand. Mom jumps in the way, dies. Harry becomes the Horcrux, which is why when he tries to go and kill Harry, it's deflected off. Well, one of the reasons. The main reason is his love, or the love that the mom has for him.
All right, whatever.
But,
I appreciate the explanation.
Yeah, man.
But this is where I'm like, maybe just sticking with the movies is the right move for me. Because, like, my eyes glossed over a little bit.
Honestly, the books don't explain it much more. This is genuinely just me guessing at how it works. Okay. Like, I'd imagine that they do a magical incantation to prepare the Horcrux, then they kill the person and their soul is split. But part of magic, I feel like because I've read tons of fantasy, sci-fi, like all sorts of fictional works. I feel like some of the beauty of magic is not explaining it all. And it does lead to places like this where you're like, well, how do you create a Horcrux then? And it's like, I don't know, magic. And you're like, okay, whatever. But there is some beauty in not explaining every single little facet of how your magic works in your fictional world.
Yeah, I get that. All right, well, now that we have gotten somehow even nerdier than we got in the last episode about this one, Brad, I think it's time for final scores. I'm going to go ahead and go first. I'm really waffling between a 9.5 and a 10, to be honest with you. I think this is the perfect Harry Potter movie. I think that even more than Prisoner of Azkaban, which, if we're being honest, might still have a little bit more like of a filmmaking craft edge on this one. Like, I think Cuaron's just a better director, and that's fine. But like you said earlier, this is the perfect marriage of content that actually matters to the overarching arc of the story and filmmaking craft. My big complaint with Prisoner of Azkaban is that in a lot of ways, that whole year could have just not happened. Like, they're not really dealing with anything that matters in the long run, except for like introducing Sirius Black. So it's cool to see Cuaron like having fun with that world. I just wish that there was like more substance to that movie. And this one is, aside from, I think, the last movie, this one might actually be the one with the most substance and the most consequence. And it is paired with, an Academy Award nominated cinematographer. It is paired with the director of this movie making the best one that he has done, ever. I do think there's a slight pacing issues. The first 20 minutes, 30 minutes are kind of slow. You really have to get used to this new pace they're trying for here. So I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10. But Brad, I think this is on par with, or perhaps even better as an overall movie than Prisoner of Azkaban.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, Bob. The Prisoner of Azkaban, I think, is overall a better movie, but it has some lower lows than this film. I'm thinking specifically of the shrunken heads and some of the other childish elements that Cuaron throws in. But for me, I'm going to give this movie a 9 out of 10. And the reason I do is because of the trio of what I consider to be really bad performances from 2 incredibly important characters and then 1 supporting character in Bonnie Wright, Michael Gambon, and Daniel Radcliffe. I just think that their performances drag down what could be close to a perfect movie. But even with that being said, I think this is a phenomenal film that I easily can give a 9 out of 10 to.
All right, so if splitting hairs then, like if you're ranking Harry Potter so far, is this the best one or is it Prisoner of Azkaban?
I think I'd leave Prisoner of Azkaban over it. Partially for the ending scene. I'm realizing that Harry Potter has a lot of great endings to all the books. And like, dude, the ending scene when Harry finally casts Expecto Patronum in Prisoner of Azkaban is a million times better than when Dumbledore gets killed at the end of this movie.
That's fair. I still think I'd put this as the best one, while acknowledging that like what Cuaron did as a filmmaker is probably better than what Yates is doing here.
Yeah, well, and even the fact that he did it like 5 years earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because like that was like what, 2004?
Mm-hmm.
Like CGI was so much worse between then and 2009. Like I'm still just so impressed with what Cuaron did.
Well, we want to know what you think about Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Is this the best one? Is it maybe the worst one to you? Please reach out and let us know your take on this movie. You can find us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Film Whiskey.
Or you can leave us a voicemail. Let your voice be heard on the Film and Whiskey podcast. You can do that by calling us through our website, which is anchor.fm/filmwhiskey.
Next week, we're actually going to be doing a programming change, which we'll explain at the beginning of that episode, but we're going to be looking at the 1999 absolute banger of a classic, The Matrix. So join us for that next week. Until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.